I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things, a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes! Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to those of you listening on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. And a special welcome to Bowling Green, because we have just started broadcasting on that channel. My name is Joe DeMare, and the we I'm talking about is myself and my co-host. Yes, together Rebecca and I are going to bring you an unforgettable hour of radio called For a Green Future. And For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment. And we talk about them in the ways that they affect you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of your friends and your families and your co-workers. And we also, hopefully during this hour, will be talking to you. And you can call in at any time at 877-909-1007. And you can also text at 419-973-5841. And you may well want to do that this hour because kind of a very special program here. What we do is first we just chat for about 10 more minutes here, but then we're going to go to a reporting I did. On Friday I went down to East Palestine, or East Palestine as they say, the site of the derailment of the toxic train down there, and interviewed some people, went around and looked at some stuff, and so we're going to play that in just a little bit here after we do some chatting. So we got a little bit of talking, and then our trip down to Palestine, and then we're going to hear from our advertisers and patrons, and after that we will hear from Rebecca. Rebecca, what do you have to talk about this week? Sounds good. Then some ecological news, and from all over the world, and then that's it. That's our show. Every week we talk about ecology and the environment, and we're very happy to do so. So, to begin, I drove down on Friday down to East Palestine to see what was going on down there, and I have to note that on the way, that I've reported before about how there's this drive to cut down all the trees along the highways, and it's really kind of getting out of hand. I mean, I saw thousands of acres of woods that had grown up along I-80 and other interstate highways just cut down, just stumps. And there was one particular bridge in Pennsylvania where on the sides of the bridge, the abutments, they had not just taken down the trees, they also dug everything up to the point where it's just mud, just straight dirt. And you know the next big rainstorm is going to start washing that out and could actually affect the structural integrity of the bridge. And I've said before on this show that I'm a green, okay, and I'm not what you'd call a socialist, and I use the mistakes that governments make when they go into doing stuff like that as sort of an explanation of why I'm not a socialist. But theme for this show, I'm also very much not fascist. That is, fascism as defined by Mussolini, the guy who invented fascism, is melding of corporate and government power. That's essentially the corporations get to make all the decisions. And what we see down there in Palestine is what happens when we allow that to become the way our country is governed. Because corporations are always focused on profits. And so they want to do things as fast and as cheap and as sloppy as they can get away with. And when the Supreme Court decided that corporations are people, they sort of put us on this path towards fascism. It's kind of inevitable now, and we see more and more of the corporations sort of running the government, running the cleanups, handling the response to disasters like the one down in East Palestine. And while I'm actually broadcasting from a hotel in Washington, D.C. right now. I came down to visit my son who lives here. And yesterday, Saturday, we went to the International Spy Museum, which is a very popular thing to do here. It's not far from the Smithsonian. It's just a little hop, skip, and jump. And one of the things in the International Spy Museum, they were talking about propaganda. And propaganda isn't just saying bold-faced lies. Propaganda is really more controlling the flow of information, of controlling what people know. And when you're in a democracy, people have to know pretty much everything, because we're being asked to make decisions as participants in a democracy. And those decisions have to be based on information. And that's why I'm bringing this show to you folks every week for an hour, just giving you as much information as I can squeeze into this hour. The thing is that if you don't get all the information, then you can't make the best decisions. And the danger is that if people are denied the necessary information over and over again, they kind of drop out of the decision-making process. And if people drop out, that's when corporations step in. And we've got several stories in our news section that kind of illustrate this very, very clearly, not the least of which we have had another House Bill 6 update, which is an issue that we've been following. But this issue down here in Palestine, it's kind of an example. It's kind of an example of getting the information of basically sort of limiting the information and kind of making things as you make it appear as transparent as possible, but you kind of don't give all the important details. And we're going to hear some very specific examples of that as we go along. So this overall experience was pretty sobering, and I just want to say that the people down there, kind of like people everywhere, when they are faced with a situation like this, they essentially are doing the best they can with the information they're given. Some people are very concerned. Some people are not concerned at all. They actually trust the government and trust what everybody's saying. Some people want to trust what they're being told, but they're seeing things that make them doubt what the official story is in a lot of ways. And just one little note that I want to make is that the Ohio EPA claims that there's like 18,000 fish that were killed, but they don't have any evidence of any other sorts of animals dying. As we listen to and watch this video, and this is one that I would urge people, if you want the real feel of what we went through, to after the show is broadcast on the radio, we put it up as a YouTube video and as a podcast. So if you go to the YouTube channel later this week after I've uploaded the video, you can see, because this recording that you're going to hear on the radio is based on videos that we took. And I do have to apologize for the quality of this, some of this audio, because it was very cold, very windy. It was hard to get good audio, but I think it'll be pretty good. You'll get the idea of it, the gist of it. But if you really want to see what was going on and what we saw, check out the video channel later on in the week. And one thing I do want to report is that we heard, in one of the videos that we took, we heard a couple birds, but we saw 0 birds. You know, the whole time we were filming, the whole time we were out, we didn't see any birds. We know that there's at least a couple around because we heard a couple, but that's just something to keep in mind, that when we were down there with cameras filming, we filmed 0 birds flying around. So keep that in mind when the Ohio EPA claims there were no animal deaths beyond the fish that they definitely were documented dying in some of the streams. So, all right, Josh, I think let's go ahead and go to that video, or go to that audio. So here we are in East Palestine. You can see the cleanup is continuing. I can count about, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I can see about 15 of the crashed cars where I am right now. We definitely smelled a pretty strong odor as we were driving up here. So it's kind of hard to describe. It's sort of a sweet odor. Right now the wind is blowing towards the car, so we're not smelling anything at the moment. But yeah, a lot of people, a lot of work, a lot of activity. But we'll see if we can manage to talk to somebody soon. Ready?
Yep.
All right, so just tell us your name.
I'm Steve Weaver.
Steve Weaver. And you weren't here when the actual derailment happened?
No.
No. But your wife was?
Yes.
What did she say about it?
She just thought something blew up at the company down below us. I was at work, so I told her I was on my way home anyhow. So by the time I got here, I could be a block and a half from here. So
oh, they blocked
yeah,
the
they had
catch.
everything blocked off. So.
And how did they get her out of it, or?
Actually, I parked the car in the middle of the road and walked down. So
Okay.
I did come down to get her and that. So.
And your dogs?
Yeah.
Did your dogs have to stay, or did you get them?
They stayed the night, and the next day we came and got them back and took them down to her father. So.
Right. So the fire was burning for quite a few days.
Yes.
Yeah. And did you guys stay away the whole time?
Yeah, we came back not this past Friday, the Friday before. So 2 days after they said we were allowed to come back.
And did you notice like a strong odor?
Nothing super strong.
So, do you feel reassured by what they're telling you?
No.
No.
Not at all. It's one of those things, you got to take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah. Do you feel like you want more information? Or?
No, definitely. We haven't been told nothing from the start, really. I mean, the only thing that they tell you is that the air quality is good and the water's good. But they ain't proven anything. I mean,
Right.
There's really nothing out there.
Not giving you any numbers.
No. And they don't know about the water. So they don't know a number.
They wouldn't tell you what was in
Yeah,
it.
they wouldn't tell you what was on the train.
So you had to clear out before they did the controlled explosion.
Yes. Within an hour, they had us evacuated down here.
Did you see the huge cloud that there's so many pictures of?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, does this make you think you might want to move or anything like that?
It's always questionable. What's going to happen later on down the road? What's already happening now?
Right. Thanks very much. Have a good one. Okay, so here's where I have to report that while we were driving around in this area, I noticed both times I got out to interview people near the tracks, when I got back in the van, even though I hadn't smelled anything, I definitely had a little bit of nausea. I definitely felt a little sick to my stomach, and it was more severe when I was closer to where they were working on the wreck, and it was less severe when we were a few blocks away. So then we kept driving around. It looks like about half the houses people still haven't returned, but we did see a cleaning truck coming in and out of one of the houses, so we stopped and we decided to interview the fella who was doing the cleaning, and here's that interview. All right, so hi, my name's Joe. What's your name?
I'm Mike.
And who
Nice
you're
to
with?
meet you. We're with Santa Effect.
Santa Effect.
It's out of Elwood City, PA.
Mm-hmm. And so you're here in East Palestine. You're cleaning people's houses.
Yes.
You're saying you're getting a lot of calls.
Yeah, we've been getting a lot of calls. got the contract from Norfolk Railroad.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So people can get this for
come
free?
in and sanitize. Yes.
They just have to
The
ask.
railroad. Yeah, the railroad's paying for it.
And so what kind of things do you try to do?
Well, we come in, and most houses come in and spray a sanitizing solution. It's all neutral, cleaner. This way, the air inside the house will be clean and free, and we get out all the germs and pesticides out of the furniture, clothing, and stuff like that.
And so people are noticing improvement after they've been in there?
Oh yes, absolutely.
So it's kind of a little chemically before you go in.
Yeah, exactly. But all our stuff is neutral and pH balanced.
So what would you say to people who are in like kind of this situation?
I would say get your houses clean, especially sanitized, and maybe your carpets scrubbed and your upholstery.
All right. Well, thanks very much.
Oh, thank you, Joe.
Pleasure.
Nice to meet you.
Ready? So here we are next to Leslie Run here in East Palestine, and as you can see, a lot of activity. They're pulling water out of this creek and sending it through these hoses over to this tanker truck there. So even though we are upstream from the actual derailment, apparently there's contamination all the way up this way too. We're from the actual train cars, but widespread contamination here, and definitely a taste in the air. Definitely something that's you can sort of feel it in your mouth as you're breathing. So here we see them spraying water from the creek back up onto the land. I'm not exactly sure what's going on there. So here we are, this is Sulphur Run, and as you can see, they're trying to completely block this water from getting further downstream, and they're pumping it out into this tanker truck. So here, some of the water they've pumped out of the creek, they're spraying it right back in. Apparently the idea is just aerating it and getting the volatile chemicals out into the air instead of into the water. So this might be a good point to note that none of the workers we saw, well, with the exception of one guy, had breathing protection. All right, so could you tell me your name?
Jensen Seabrook.
Okay, we're working here at the original Roadhouse 2. What are people saying when they come in? Are people worried about the whole situation?
I mean, some people just don't want like the fountain drinks, like the water. Like,
So they're avoiding the water.
Yeah.
Are people complaining about?
Not necessarily here. Nobody really complains. As long as we're open, that's all they care, really.
So do you live here in town? Or?
Yeah, I live on Carbon Hill.
Carbon Hill. So you were outside the evacuation zone?
Yeah, for the most part. They made me leave when they decompressed when they blew it up.
Oh, right. So did you see the cloud and everything?
Yeah, I saw it.
Yeah, what was that like?
It was big. I don't know. It's crazy.
Big, crazy. So, are you worried going forward about like contamination or long-term stuff?
I mean, as of now, I'm not. I mean, it's whatever. Life is life. It's gonna happen. So I mean,
Right. And you didn't notice anything?
I don't notice
personally
anything
about,
happening to me, but I heard people say something about like getting sick and stuff, like, and they're blaming it all on that.
Oh, I see.
But I'm fine. I've been fine.
Okay. So what would you want people to know about East Palestine that they're not getting on the news?
What do you mean?
This town. Anything you'd like to say about your town that people don't normally hear about in this situation?
I mean, I feel like this is the train derailment. That's like one of the biggest things that has actually brought us together and actually act like a town for once.
Oh, okay. So silver lining.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks very much. So here we see one of the many air sampling devices that are scattered all over the neighborhood. Now, there was no indication on these air monitors who they were being monitored for. It didn't say anything about Department of Health. And in fact, we did run into a fellow, one of the yellow vest fellows who was taking air samples, and he told us he was with a private corporation, but he didn't tell us who he worked for, and he, of course, couldn't tell us what he found. So then we drove around to the other side of the tracks, and we took a look at what was going on there. We tried to park at a place where we could get a good shot what was going on, but they made us move, so we filmed the houses behind which all this activity is taking place, and I couldn't help but think when I looked at those houses, and you could just catch glimpses of the wrecked train trucks, train cars behind those houses, and you see the dumpsters that are lined up to put contaminated soil into. And I couldn't help thinking that when they did the burns and when the fires was going, those houses must have been completely engulfed in highly toxic smoke. So anyway, we pulled along there. We pretty much ran the length of where the derailed cars were off the tracks. And then we went over, we found a parking lot where we could get a picture of what was going on. And I'm just going to let the sounds, the ambient sounds go for a minute here. So what you were hearing there were these huge grapplers, kind of like cranes, but at the end they had the big grabbers. They were lifting up these chunks of metal, putting them into dump trucks.
On the other side of the tracks, you can see the remains of vehicles that were destroyed in the fire. Past a street sweeper. All this mud on the road is probably carrying contamination in it. Definitely got a strong taste in my mouth. This is obviously going to be a very long cleanup. It's a lot of contamination. So it's just
All right. So that was our report, and I have to confess that we didn't spend the whole day there. We kind of bombed in and out because, like I said, there was definitely a feeling of nausea when I got back in the van, and my co-worker there, he reported having headaches that he didn't have before we went, and so we didn't want to spend a lot of time in East Palestine, but I think you got a pretty good taste of what's going on down there. The first interview with someone who lives literally a couple houses away from the tracks. The second was with the cleaning guy, and the third was with the hostess at the original Roadhouse 2 restaurant there in East Palestine, where we had a very nice lunch. So that was our report. And if you have any questions about it, please feel free to call in 877-909-1007, or you can send us a text at 419-973-5841. So just a few more things to follow up on that report. One, it turns out, according to the governor's website, that those air monitors are somehow it's a public-private cooperation between the US EPA and some private corporation that they didn't name. One thing that they're doing, some of that water that we saw being sprayed back into the creek, apparently some of that is coming from upstream. They're taking water out of Sulphur Run above the wreck and then spraying it back into Sulphur Run below the wreck, with the idea that way uncontaminated water is going to go all the way through. Well testing so far has showed zero contaminants, according to the governor's website. But of course, what happens is the contaminants have to travel through the ground and to get into the groundwater before it'll show up in a well, and that process could take weeks or even months. So so far there's no official things, but now we're faced with a situation where the official story is that everything is fine, that they're showing no contamination in the air monitoring that they're doing. And the people who live there, a lot of them are reporting symptoms similar to what we experienced after just being there for a few hours. They're saying they got burning eyes, headaches, nausea. And it turns out that the chemicals that they're putting in there, they still haven't listed all of the chemicals, but the ones they have listed so far are vinyl chloride, butyl acrylate, ethyl hexyl acrylate, ethyl hexyl acrylate, and ethylene glycol monobutyl ether, which all of them are very dangerous chemicals that you don't want to mess with. And just a slight, how should I put this? Some way that we're seeing the corporate spin on this is you've probably heard reports that hydrogen chloride is one of the products that you get when you burn vinyl chloride, and the other product is phosgene. But I just want to mention that hydrogen chloride, everybody's describing it as hydrogen chloride, but what that is, HCl, that's hydrochloric acid. So they could be saying clouds of hydrochloric acid, but I guess technically, chemically, because it's the gas form and not the liquid form, people, the news reporting can get away with saying it's hydrogen chloride, which doesn't sound that bad, but in fact, it is hydrochloric acid. It's just the gas form, not the. And so also burning these chemicals together can produce other chemicals, myriad other chemicals, including possibly dioxins, which are among the most toxic chemicals in the world. If you want more interest, more detail, more firsthand stuff, the Washington Post has a good story on this where they redo a video that's aired a lot on TikTok. Basically, a lot of the nearby residents that have chickens and ducks and things, are reporting dead animals and dead fish. And two more points before we move on from this. One point is that I was been trying to figure what the smell, how to describe the smell that we did smell as we were driving up to the wreck, and I would describe it. I said it's kind of sweet. The closest thing I could think of is the smell of a dryer sheet. It's that sort of sweet chemical smell, which smells almost pleasant, but it really wasn't. It was a little scary to smell that. And two, back to this whole theme again of opposing fascism, opposing corporate influence on our government. There's a braking system. It's called the e-braking system, and it's the modern system that's in use in Europe right now. And what happens with that is when there's a wreck, when there's an emergency, and you have to stop the train, e-braking systems put the brakes on all the cars at once. So each car only has to stop itself. Our current braking system in the United States, which is the same braking system which has been in use since the Civil War, the one back in the 1800s, it's a consecutive braking system where it's kind of like Christmas tree lights. If there's one tree out, if there's one bulb out in a series circuit, none of the bulbs light up. In this situation, you go down the line. It's like one car after the other brakes, and it's a much slower, much less safe braking prospect, but it's much less expensive than e-brakes, which would require a total rework. And so what we need to do is tell the government, tell Pete Buttigieg, tell the Department of Transportation, make e-brakes mandatory. Force the train companies to invest that little bit in order to make us safer. And the degree to which those sorts of things don't happen, the degree to which the corporations continue to just dictate what regulations they follow, that's the degree to which we have tripped over into a quote-unquote fascist state, a corporate governed state. So
this is Joe DeMare breaking in with a voiceover recording here because unfortunately the radio station lost its skimmer recording of the program that aired live. So what happened here in this part of the show is my co-host Rebecca Wood was making observations about where exactly this train derailment was, and she was saying that people from all over the world are asking her if she's okay because she lives in Ohio, even though Toledo is almost as far away from East Palestine as you can get and still be in Ohio. So, and it's I'm going to have to periodically step into the recording here to fill in the blanks because we lost quite a bit when they lost their recording.
Yeah, it's possible. This crash was literally about a mile from the Pennsylvania border, the eastern border of Ohio. And actually, Pittsburgh is the city that was probably downwind when they were creating that huge, big, ugly plume of toxic stuff. That was our report, and as I say, if you want to see the images that go with that audio, you can look up our YouTube version. So now it's time to turn to a much more pleasant subject. Those are our advertisers and patrons. For Green Futures brought to you by the Ecofill Shop. The Ecofill Shop is located at 115 West Mary in Bowling Green, Ohio. They sell lots of different things: cosmetics, bath and body, home and garden, cleaning, towels, knickknacks, candles, fragrances, and more. They sell all these things without plastic containers because the whole purpose of the Ecofill Shop is to eliminate plastic. Customers love them. In fact, we have a testimonial here from Nikki, and Nikki says, "I'm loving the products they offer. It's sensible and affordable, all while being eco-friendly and plant-based, eliminating the unnecessary use of chemicals. Their products are 10 times less expensive compared to the overly expensive Norwex products. Not to mention the cleaning products come in refillable or recyclable glass bottles, reducing unnecessary trash. 10 out of 10 in my book." So that's just one of the many testimonials you'll see at their website, ecofillshop.com. And I am one of their customers, and every morning back home I shave using my little shaving brush and my bar of shaving soap that I bought at the Ecofill Shop. If you're interested, give them a call at 419-944-8862. Talk to the owner, Jossie, who's very passionate about environmental issues, all sorts of environmental issues. Or you can check out their website at ecofillshop.com, or better yet, just drop in and pay them a visit at 115 West Mary in Bowling Green, Ohio. That's the Ecofill Shop. And For Green Futures also brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They restore wildlife habitats, and they lead people on outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy, from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. And there's a bunch of ways you can get a hold of them. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. That's 419-353-1897. You can also go to their website, which is wcparks.org, and search for them on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc. That you would just search for WC Parks. So that's the Wood County Park District. And For Green Futures also brought to you by our amazing patrons. And I have to be doubly grateful this week because I actually forgot to thank our patrons last week, but we couldn't bring this show to you without them. And our patrons are people who've gone to patreon.com, that's Patreon, and there they found For Green Futures site on Patreon. They went through the different levels of membership, and they picked a level of membership that makes sense with their budget. And so every week a little bit of money comes out of their account, comes over to us, and that's how we can afford to bring you For a Green Future. So many, many thanks to our patrons. All right, Rebecca, so speaking of bodies of water, you're going to be talking about Lake Erie.
Yeah, well, today we have Lake Erie, which is an important body of water for many reasons, including historically relating to Black History Month. General facts, it is the fourth largest Great Lake of North America by surface area, 11th largest lake of any kind globally, I guess. Of the Great Lakes, the southernmost and the shallowest and smallest by volume. Also has the shortest water residence time. I looked this up. It's basically the volume of a body of water divided by inflow or outflow. So I guess first you measure the inflow and the outflow, and you do some addition or subtraction, and a bigger number you you divide the lake volume by that. So that's complicated. Anyway, at its deepest, it's 210 feet. It is a glacial lake, meaning with like all the Great Lakes, it was the remnants of one big lake at one point, one big old frozen lake, and it receded, leaving us a bunch of big lakes and some swampland where I'm located. Its primary inflow is the Detroit River, and the outflow is the Niagara River and the Welland Canal, which I've never heard of, but it's definitely a thing. It connects Ontario and Erie, Lakes Ontario and Erie, and it kind of, more or less, I looked at it on a map. It seems to run parallel with the Niagara River, and it's an entire 90 years old. So it's been there for a while. Who knew? So yeah, it's kind of speed things up, made things two-way with the exchange between the two lakes. Environmental issues with Lake Erie would consist of algae, mostly algae. That's the first thing you see. It's hard to tell if there are no other environmental issues with Lake Erie, or if that one is just so huge that it's all anyone wants to talk about because it is pretty bad. So that's important because the Lake Erie provides drinking water for 11 million people, which is 1/3 the population of the Great Lakes Basin, I guess, including 7 metropolitan areas over 50,000 in population, and 12 million people live in the Lake Erie watershed. So it's a little confusing because there's a Lake Erie watershed, and then there's the Great Lakes Basin, and the 12 million living in the Lake Erie watershed represents 1/3 of the population of the Great Lakes Basin. So I finally figured out all those numbers all relate to each other. It was considered to be a dying lake in the 1960s, but it was brought back by limiting phosphorus by the U.S. and Canada. It really required international cooperation for that. It is reportedly the dirtiest Great Lakes, mostly because agricultural, its entire shore is ringed by major cities, agricultural and industry. So it's kind of it gets the worst of all three worlds, I guess. Right now there are oxygen-free dead zones created when algae dies and decomposes in Lake Erie. And that's bad because it threatens, among other things, human life, but animal plant life also. But 12.9 billion dollars in tourism and major fishery income. So that's something people listen to when they won't listen to the human and animal life argument sometimes. Because of the shallowness of the water, it rapidly heats and cools, freezes over almost every year, and is the most biologically productive Great Lake, which I looked that up too. It's just basically how much food it generates, how much fish it generates, and turns that into bigger fish, and pretty soon you got a lot of fish. Also of interest, because as I mentioned, the Underground Railroad, all of northern Ohio was pretty much a hotbed for that, because that was the great thing about having a little kind of shallow lake right there, right between you and Canada, and you go one state to the south or the east from Ohio, and you have the South. So that made it kind of a conduit. There are tours you can take, I believe, in Sandusky, involving multiple locations, including a safe house. Ashtabula has some stuff, and also Sylvania, which is a western suburb of Toledo, basically. Sylvania has the Lathrop House, which there was a big dust up about that. There was a couple year-long battle between St. Joseph's Catholic Church, which just basically wanted to bulldoze it, and Friends of the Lathrop House wanted it left exactly where it was. They compromised in the end, and they moved it to where you can see the site where it was, which is marked by a stone, from where it is now, which is kind of bad in a way because the site was kind of important. Like, it was important to how it operated. It's built, the way it's built is kind of cool. There's a double oven either in the basement or the kitchen. Accounts vary. But so, there'd be a door and you would open it, and then you could climb through the oven itself into the back door, which went into a room. So you could put people in there if you were really desperate and light the oven. And, somebody would open it up and be like, oh, there's nobody in there. It's an oven, So I don't know that. I think might get kind of warm for the people in back of the oven, though. The way was set up was important because there was a big ravine behind the property, and on one side was the Lathrop house, and on the other side of this ravine was the Haroon barn, which was the hayloft there, and the attic of the Lathrop house were also used to hide people. So the ravine was great because you could just come right up it and get into your place without ever sort of being exposed to plain sight, which was nice. Was run by the Reverend Universalist minister, Reverend Lucian Lathrop, and his wife Larissa. And also the Haroon family was involved, David and Clarissa Dodge Haroon. The house was it was a Greek Revival style house built in 1850. Also, maybe not coincidentally, the year of the passage of the Fugitive Slave Law was 1850. So, they got to get on the ground floor, as it were, build their house special to accommodate that time, which, sometimes you wonder if you're coming up on secret compartment in the attic times again these days. But Lucian Lathrop was also, Larissa Lathrop was raised a Quaker in Rochester. And Lucian Lathrop was a state representative in the legislature of Ohio, while he was also doing illegal things, hiding slaves back here. So he worked within the law and without the law and changed the system from both ends, and was just that kind of guy. Apparently David and Clarissa, the Haroons, used to bring people up from Maumee, and then because that's where apparently the route began in Cincinnati, came up by the Miami and Erie Canal. See, I did not know this. I was wondering if the canal was in any way involved. And then they'd bring people up the little ravine to the house, and then from there they'd go on to either Adrian or Detroit. And it's open from Sundays from 1 to 4 if you want to ever come to Toledo and visit it. I'm kind of curious now. I would like to know whether escaped slaves got to ride on the actual canal boat somehow undercover, or if they just were walking along the banks and things, or maybe riding in little rowboats. That would be the most discreet way, I would think. Anyway, that was interesting. Thank you.
All right, well, and that ties in with something I also wanted to announce, is that this February 23rd at Bowling Green, there's going to be a hearing on the Ohio EPA's plan to limit the phosphorus that's going into the lake and causing all these algal blooms. The fact that it's in Bowling Green is a little concerning because Wood County is where most of the farmers that put most of the phosphorus into the lake are located. So, but it's a good one to check the Ohio EPA website, and if you have time to get over to one of those two hearings, there's one at 2 and one at 4 on February 23rd. As we have reported with previously on our show with Sandy Bin, talking about that whole thing. So go look at our interview with Sandy Bin a few weeks ago. All right, thank you, Rebecca. And now on to ecological news. And our first story, we got a fair amount of time here, but still time for a call or a text at 419-973-5841 or 877-909-1007. First story, off to New Mexico, where they have decided, the New Mexico Senate passed a bill. It's reported in the Albuquerque Journal back on February 13th. They have made a bill that says we got a caller. All right, well, let me just finish this real quick and then we'll go to the caller. New Mexico Senate has voted to ban the storage of nuclear waste in New Mexico. So good on them. We have yet to see if that'll stand up against what the feds want to do to New Mexico, but it's a great first step. So at this point in the show, we got a call. A very nice call from a gentleman who wanted to talk a little bit more about the hearing that was going to be held on the 23rd, or that is going to be held on February 23rd, in Bowling Green on the Ohio EPA's proposed rule on the total maximum daily load of phosphorus that goes into Lake Erie. And we had a little bit of a discussion about that, and there was a little bit of confusion about where the hearing's being held. He was under the impression it's at Bowling Green State University. That is incorrect. The hearing, and I'm looking right at the Ohio EPA website as I'm reading you this, the hearing is going to be, there's two hearings. They're going to be at the Veterans Memorial Building atrium, which is in the city park in Bowling Green, Ohio. The address is 520 Conneaut Avenue. And there's two hearings. One's going to run from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m., and the other's going to run from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. And hopefully there'll be a lot of people there telling the Ohio EPA not to put any more phosphorus into the lake and to regulate. His main point was that these CAFOs, these concentrated animal feeding operations, are regulated as if they were non-point sources, as if they weren't a particular point that was putting pollution into the lake, when, of course, in reality, they are point sources. I mean, it's one building producing enough sewage, more sewage than a medium-sized city, and so it should be regulated in that manner. But it was a very nice call, and sorry once again that the station lost the recording, but we appreciate every caller that we get. So back to the show. Thanks very much for the call, and you're right. It is kind of out of control. All right, so still time for more calls or texts, but we're going to continue on with our ecological news. Next story, over to China, and this was a story that was reported in Renew Economy back on February 14th, and the Chinese have created a 10 megawatt onshore wind turbine, which is a world record. Up till now, the largest available onshore wind turbines have been 7 megawatts, and offshore, of course, they can get up to 15 megawatts. But the thing about it is that every time you increase the size a little bit, you get a ton more power, because the amount of power in the wind is the square of the blade area. So every time if you can double the blades, you don't get double the power, you get 4 times the power. And if you triple the blades, you don't get 3 times the power, you get 8 times the power. So every little bit, every time they can push the technology to make these turbines bigger, means less coal that we have to burn, less nuclear that we have to create. It's great. Unfortunately, it also appears that in the U.S., the misinformation is being peddled so much that our wind is kind of leveling off. It's been increasing at a great rate, but now there's so much misinformation-based political opposition that our wind industry seems to be slowing down a bit. So let's hope we can reverse that. Next story, over to Minnesota, and this is following up on just last week's story. Unfortunately, last week we reported that Minnesota's decided to go carbon-free by 2040, so yay. But this past week, it turns out that in the Duluth News Tribune has a story, again on February 14th, lawmakers weigh nuclear study as Minnesota shoots for carbon-free electricity by 2040. So in other words, the nukers, the pro-nuclear lobby, is stepping in there and saying, oh, you want to be carbon-free? Well, here, just all you need to do is get radioactive too, and then you can be radioactive and carbon-free. Let's hope they shoot this down and don't even go that route, because as we know from study after study, you don't need nuclear power to get to zero carbon. You know, as we've interviewed Mark Jacobson on this show, we can do it with the wind and the sun and the hydro and the geothermal, the stuff we've already got. We don't need to make these new horrible nuclear plants. And so that takes us to our next story. We go over to Georgia, where they're building new horrible nuclear plants. In fact, they've been building them for almost a decade now, or more than a decade actually. They've been building them for about 14 years. The Vogtle plants, and the Vogtle plants just announced they have yet another delay, another technical issue. Now it looks like Southern Company is saying that their Unit 3 won't be operational till June, and they had promised it would be in January or February this year in their last promise, but and they're saying Unit 4 won't be operational till 2024, which means that these plants are now 7 years behind schedule. They were supposed to start in 2016, and they're over $20 billion over budget. So, or I should say about $20 billion over budget, not over 20 yet. They're racing towards the $20 billion mark. They haven't quite hit 20 billion over budget, as opposed to, the original budget was just 14 billion, and now it's almost 34 billion spent so far. So once again, nuclear is a bad bet. It takes too long, it's too expensive, it's too dangerous. But once again, going back to our theme of fascism, the Georgia Public Service Commission works for Southern Energy. It doesn't work for the people of Georgia, because Southern Energy made $3.5 billion in profit last year, essentially because the Georgia Public Service Commission always gives them every rate increase and has approved charging the people of Georgia for the construction of these nuclear plants, no matter how long they take to build or no matter how much they cost to build. So Southern is making tons of profit over making these nuclear plants that are almost a decade behind schedule and many billions of dollars over budget, and they have no reason to do anything else, because in a fascist state, the corporations are guaranteed profit, and you and I, the regular citizens, are forced to pay their profits by the government. That is fascism. And so now that brings us to our final story, which is our inevitable House Bill 6 update. And the Ohio Capital Journal has a story on February 16th, Ohio's billion-dollar bailout bribery trial, showcasing rampant arrogance, corruption, and enabling. And this is by David DeWitt. And what the good folks at the Ohio Capital Journal have been following the trial of Larry Householder, the former Speaker of the Ohio House, who's on trial for these bribery charges having to do with House Bill 6. And at the trial last week, they played recordings of the right-wing lobbyist Neil Clark, and he basically told undercover FBI agents how it's done. And this is exactly the way these corporations like First Energy are running our government right now. And essentially in this recorded conversation, Neil Clark said, basically you make dark money contributions to the politicians, and then they'll do whatever you want them to do. And so he described what you do is you have to make them in big enough chunks to get their attention, $15,000 to $25,000 deposit, donations, quote unquote, as opposed to, they don't call them bribes, but same process. And here's a direct quote from this article that Neil Clark said, based on a Supreme Court decision, businesses can do this and nobody can do anything about it. Politicians can get a bunch of money and say, I didn't know, because it's coming through these dark money corporations. And that, in a nutshell, folks, that is fascism. That is corporations running the government. And Householder and Longstreth, one of his associates, is when he was trying to get to be Speaker of the House again, they got flown to D.C. for a beautiful, lavish steak dinner. And then 2 weeks later, they came back and they founded Generation Now, which Longstreth founded that was the dark money organization that Householder used to put into office his First Energy, stooges, basically, his people that would guarantee they would always vote First Energy's way. He used that money from there. And most of those folks are still in office, even though Householder himself got kicked out of the Ohio House. Most of the people he put into place to represent First Energy are still there and still voting in favor of nuclear power whenever they get a chance. So Larry Householder right now, his trial is on hold because he's apparently feeling ill, feeling sick. And this is part of the whole idea that you just keep delaying and delaying. It's been over 2 years since he was arrested, and they're just now getting into his trial. So we have to keep a watch on this. And this is one of those tests. Will Larry Householder be held responsible? Yes or no? It's a very real test of our democracy itself. That's it. This was a much more intense episode than usual, but I'm glad you stuck with us for the hour. Thank you so much for listening. This is Joe DeMare.
And Rebecca Wood, and we are signing off. I want to just thank everyone once again so much for listening. We really appreciate you, and we'll be back next week. Should be interesting. No. I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!